The receipt in my coat pocket crinkled as I stood in the doorway, their voices slicing the air behind the living room wall. Still, I didn't speak. Just let the grocery bags dig into my arms while my own son called me just mouths to feed. As Janelle laughed, the plastic handles burned deeper into my skin, red, silent, and sharp. While the sitcom resumed, I unpacked almond milk I didn't drink and set their silence down beside mine. The same coat that held their errands also held the keys, and the codes they forgot I knew. That's when I decided, if I've only been feeding them, then it's time I stop funding the feast. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Nancy had just come in from the cold, the grocery bag still hooked over her forearms, cutting red lines into her skin through the weight of canned beans, dog food, and discount rotisserie chicken. The front door clicked shut behind her with a soft finality, and she stood there for a second longer than usual, listening. From the living room, she could hear Greg's voice. Tired, sharp around the edges. I don't know what you want me to do, Janelle. I can't just make a paycheck appear. Janelle didn't even pause. We've already had this conversation, Greg. If your mom won't pull more weight, then I don't see how this works anymore. Nancy froze in place, bags still cutting into her skin. She didn't set them down. She didn't clear her throat or announce she was home. We're carrying dead weight, Janelle went on. Emotionally, financially, she just exists here. She doesn't help. Nancy's breath stayed lodged somewhere behind her sternum. The smell of cold air clung to her coat, mingling with the faint scent of detergent that hadn't quite masked the mildew in the house's carpet. She didn't hear Greg object. No sharp defense, no tired "she's trying," or even a sigh of disagreement. Only a shrug, a barely audible one. Then, "She's just mouths to feed now," Janelle added, with a forced little laugh like she thought she was being clever. A flush crept up Nancy's neck, but she didn't move. She let their words stack up like unpaid bills. She waited until the TV volume resumed, a streaming drama clicking back into place with someone else's scripted chaos. Then, quietly, she walked into the kitchen. The tile was cold beneath her shoes. She unloaded the bags mechanically. Eggs, milk. The almond milk Janelle always insisted on but never bought herself. A jar of off-brand peanut butter, dented but still sealed. She moved without urgency, as though her body had known before her mind had caught up. She could hear them laugh from the other room. Not a happy laugh, just the kind that fills space. She sat at the kitchen table with a reheated cup of yesterday's coffee. Ate a banana, slowly. Didn't cry. Didn't say a word. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence like an old wound reopening. No one noticed her. No one said thank you. That night, long after the dishwasher finished its half-full cycle and the lights in the hallway blinked out one by one, Nancy sat in the guest room, her room, technically, though it had never felt like it, and pulled open the top drawer of her nightstand. A floral hotel notepad sat on top, thin paper with fading gold edges, the kind you forget you took until you need it. She clicked her pen open with a quiet snap and wrote 4 words at the top of the page. Keys, papers, accounts, plan. She drew slow checkboxes next to each. Under keys, she listed the garage duplicate, the mailbox spare, the one Janelle didn't know opened the attic safe. Under papers, she wrote, birth certificate, title transfers, health insurance file, Greg's old loan cosign form. Under accounts, she listed the checking and savings in her name, the shared emergency fund, and the prepaid tutoring fund for Brielle's SAT prep. Plan was left blank for now, not out of uncertainty, but precision. She looked around the room. The bedspread was neatly tucked, floral and faded. The framed photo of Greg's high school graduation still sat on the shelf. Nancy stared at it for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she took it down, opened the back, slipped out the photo, and behind it, slid the notepad page, folded in half. She placed the frame back, angled perfectly, like nothing had changed. Down the hallway, Janelle's voice rose in complaint again, something about laundry not switching itself. Greg's voice followed, dull and flat. Nancy lay back on the bed, arms crossed over her chest like she was bracing for a storm no one else believed was coming. The grocery receipt was still in her coat pocket. She'd bought the almond milk after all. The next morning arrived with the sound of the furnace kicking on and the faint clatter of someone rummaging through the kitchen drawers. Nancy was already dressed. Jeans, sweater, hair brushed, no makeup. She'd been awake since before dawn, watching the ceiling, feeling her pulse steady into something cool and deliberate. The list from the night before waited on her nightstand. Keys, papers, accounts, plan. The words looked smaller than she remembered, but they held the same quiet gravity. Down the hall, Janelle's voice filtered through. "Did you see the gas bill? It's outrageous. I told your mom to handle that weeks ago." Greg mumbled something, low and indecisive. Nancy smiled faintly, not out of amusement, but recognition. They had just handed her the first checkbox. She sat at her small desk, opened her laptop, and began signing in. Savings first. Her cursor hovered over the balance, the same account she'd built when she was still working double shifts at the hospital. Tucking away 10% like it was scripture. She'd let Greg's name stay on it for emergencies, but every deposit, every cent had come from her. She clicked Manage Access, and with a breath as steady as her hands, she removed his authorization. A single line of text appeared. Joint user privileges revoked. The simplicity of it almost made her laugh. Next came utilities. Power, water, internet. Each one had her name stamped across the top. She opened the billing portals, changed passwords, and rerouted correspondence to her private email, the one no one knew about. The email she'd made when Brielle was a child, back when Nancy still kept photos and recipes neatly organized in digital folders labeled with hearts and seasons. By the time the sun crept through the blinds, her list had grown denser. Groceries, gas, medical premiums, tutoring. Each item came with a dollar amount she knew by memory. Each a line of quiet proof that she'd been the scaffolding holding up everyone else's life. At 9:30, she dialed Linda. Her friend's voice came through warm, then sharper when she heard the tone in Nancy's. "They said it out loud, didn't they?" Nancy didn't answer that directly. "I'm just organizing a few things." "Uh-huh," Linda said, not buying it. "You organizing or you liberating?" Nancy smiled despite herself. "Bit of both." There was a pause. The faint hum of Linda's coffee maker filled the background. "They're not your family anymore, Nance," Linda said softly. "They're your clients, and bad ones at that." The truth landed gently, not cruelly, but cleanly, like disinfectant on a wound. By noon, Nancy was in her car. The passenger seat stacked with manila folders. The glove compartment held her passport, social security card, and the faded blue envelope containing her nursing license. Expired but not irrelevant. She drove across town, past the chain restaurants and tidy office parks, until she found the self-storage complex off Cascade Avenue. The clerk barely looked up from his tablet. "Month to month, okay?" Nancy nodded. "And it needs to be under the name Coulter, Anne." He tapped it in without comment. Anne was her middle name, the one no one ever used. Unit 142B smelled of dust and concrete and new beginnings. She slid open the door and stepped inside. The sound echoed, hollow and full of promise. From her folder, she placed 3 boxes neatly on the metal shelf. Financial records, medical documents Brielle Trust, Pending. She exhaled slowly. The air tasted of cold metal and old paper. She locked the door, twisted the key twice, and slipped it into her coat pocket. That single click of the padlock felt like a heartbeat resetting. Outside, the sun had dipped low, catching the peaks of Pikes Peak in faded orange. She pulled out her phone and texted Linda one word. Done. Linda replied a minute later. Good. Start keeping receipts for freedom. Nancy smiled at the phrasing, the kind of thing only Linda could say without sounding absurd. Back home, the house smelled of reheated pizza. Greg was half asleep on the couch, Janelle scrolling through her phone. Neither looked up when Nancy walked past with her purse and keys. The sound of the lock clicking behind her was the quietest rebellion imaginable. She drove to the diner by the old library, ordered a slice of pie, and opened her notebook again. At the bottom of the page, under Plan, she wrote her first real sentence. I leave quietly. They'll notice loudly. She folded the page in half, tucked it into her purse, and looked out the window at the gathering dark. Nancy's phone buzzed twice before sunrise. 2 email alerts stacked on top of each other. Transaction approved, $250. Spa Haven, Colorado Springs. Transaction approved, $149.99. Cork and Vine Online Wine Club. She stared at the glowing screen in the dark, the blue light painting her face like the reflection off still water. Her coffee hadn't even finished brewing. She didn't feel anger. She felt a strange, brittle calm. The kind that comes after the breaking point has already passed. Her thumb hovered over the report fraud link, but she didn't press it. Not yet. She wanted to see it clearly. How they moved when they thought she wasn't watching. She pulled her notebook closer, flipped to a clean page, and wrote in neat small letters. Spa Deposit, Janelle Wine Club. Greg, pretending it's her card again. Underneath, she drew a line and wrote, Today. No more signatures, but mine. By 9 o'clock, she was standing under the warm fluorescent lights of First Mountain Credit Union. The building smelled faintly of printer toner and peppermint from a bowl near the teller window. The branch had barely opened. She'd planned it that way. A familiar voice called from behind the counter. Nancy Coulter, you're early today. She turned. Sam Delgado leaned against his glass cubicle, smiling like he always did. Kind, professional, the sort of man who could remember a customer's favorite pie at the bake sale 20 years ago. His tie was crooked, like it always had been since his wife passed. Nancy had known him that long. Got a minute? She asked. For you? Always. He gestured toward his office. Come on back. Once the door shut, Nancy set her folder on the desk. No small talk. No pleasantries. She slid the list across. The one from her nightstand, updated in tidy blue ink. Sam adjusted his glasses, read quietly, then looked up. You want to shut it all down? Her answer came steady. Everything but Brielle's school fund. He nodded slowly, weighing the words. You're sure? Joint accounts, co-signed cards, the autopay setups. Once I do this, they'll feel it. They already did worse, Nancy said. They just didn't know I was watching. Sam's brows furrowed, but there was no judgment in his voice. All right, let's start clean. He logged in, typing with quiet precision. Lines of data scrolled across his monitor, the electronic pulse of her family's dependency. He began unlinking Greg's profile, suspending Janelle's access, rerouting every alert to Nancy's private inbox. She watched, still as stone. Each click was an exhale. He stopped midway. You want to move the main savings into a single owner trust? That'll wall it off completely. Do it, she said. Sam smiled faintly. I'll name it whatever you want. Nancy thought for a moment. The Quiet Fund. Sam chuckled. Fitting. As he processed the paperwork, Nancy traced her fingertips along the edge of her folder, the embossed label reading Coulter Family Accounts. The letters suddenly felt like a relic from another life. She thought about Greg's shrug, Janelle's laugh, the silence that followed. Her pulse didn't quicken. It slowed. Sam printed the forms, his pen poised. "You'll want to sign these in blue ink." She did. Each signature was neat, decisive. One after another, she reclaimed her name. When the last form was done, Sam tore off a final slip and handed it across. "New checks. Where should I have them mailed?" "Linda Marsh," she said without hesitation. "Her address in Woodland Heights. I'll text it to you." Sam's eyes softened. "She's still baking that awful banana bread?" "Worse," Nancy said, allowing herself a small grin. "Now she adds raisins." They shared the kind of short laugh people do when something heavy hangs just beneath it. He leaned back in his chair. "Nancy, you don't owe me an explanation, but I've known you a long time. Whatever you're doing it clean. Just make sure you've got a place to land." She met his gaze. "Already do." Outside, the day had turned glassy and bright. Nancy walked to her car, the folder pressed against her chest like a shield. She opened the door, slid inside, and sat for a long moment before starting the engine. Across the street, a young woman loaded her toddler into an SUV, fumbling with keys and juice boxes. Nancy watched her for a moment. The small struggle of it all. Once upon a time, that had been her life too. The difference was, back then, she'd believed gratitude would someday come. Her phone buzzed again. Another email. "Transaction declined. Insufficient access privileges." Nancy smiled, set the phone face down on the passenger seat, and turned the key. Nancy waited until the house fell asleep. The television's drone dulled to static. The dishwasher clicked off. And even the dog, more theirs than hers, had stopped pacing. Midnight light cut across the hallway, silver and sharp, painting the edges of picture frames she didn't intend to touch again. She stood in the doorway of her room, the duffel bag unzipped on the bed like an open mouth. It wasn't hesitation keeping her still. It was inventory. Essentials only. No sentiment. No clutter of the years she'd quietly funded. The first bag was simple. Clothes, sturdy and unassuming. A week's worth. Socks rolled tight, 2 sweaters, her worn nursing shoes, because she'd learned long ago that comfort was a kind of defense. The second bag was heavier. Folders, envelopes, every paper with her name that mattered. The storage unit key hung from a ribbon looped through the zipper pull. Inside, her passport, social security card, insurance forms. She checked each twice, methodical as a nurse counting pills before a shift change. The third bag sat half empty for a long time. She filled it slowly. Toothbrush, medications, the leather wallet Brielle had bought her for Christmas 2 years ago, with the words, "Strong as ever," embossed inside. Finally, the small velvet box from her dresser. The necklace. A single silver heart charm, crooked where it had once bent against a door frame. Brielle's tiny hands had tied it on her birthday when she turned 9. Nancy held it in her palm, cool and familiar. She didn't cry. She just placed it in the pocket of the duffel, zipped it closed, and exhaled. She moved quietly through the house, lights off, muscle memory guiding her. On the dining table sat her nameplate from the hospital, Nancy Coulter, RN, its brass surface catching a shard of streetlight through the blinds. She ran her thumb across the letters once, then left it there. It belonged to a version of herself she no longer needed to bring along. The photo albums on the bookshelf were harder. Decades of birthdays, road trips, messy Christmas mornings. She opened one at random. A young Greg in a Cub Scout uniform, missing a front tooth. Janelle laughing beside him years later in a wedding photo. Nancy's handwriting marked the corners of every page. 2005, first house. 2012, Brielle's first recital. Each caption felt like a signature on something she'd never been paid for. She closed the book gently and set it back, spine aligned with the rest. At 5:47 a.m., the sky outside started to pale. The world wasn't awake yet, but the morning had begun to hum. Nancy slid the last zipper shut and took one last walk through the house, past the framed motivational quote Janelle had hung in the hallway. Family is everything. Past the pantry she'd kept stocked, past the laundry machine she'd replaced herself. At the front door, she laid her keyring on the counter. The clink echoed far too loud in the stillness. She took the spare garage key from her pocket, the one Greg didn't know existed, and dropped it beside the others. No hesitation, just the sound of closure. Outside, the cold bit through her sweater. A car's headlights blinked once in the driveway. Linda, right on time. She was leaning against the steering wheel, engine idling, coffee in hand. The woman's face was set in a calm, watchful expression. She didn't wave. Nancy crossed the yard slowly, duffel straps biting into her shoulders. When she reached the mailbox, she paused. From her coat pocket, she pulled a small envelope sealed in blue wax. The handwriting on the front was simple, deliberate. To Brielle only. She slipped it inside, closed the flap, and stood there for a moment, fingertips still resting on the metal as though transferring something invisible, a kind of blessing. Linda reached over and opened the passenger door. No words, no questions, just space. Nancy set her bags inside, slid in beside her, and shut the door with a soft click. As the car rolled down the street, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it was just another roof line, indistinguishable from the others. The world ahead was open and cold and clean. Nancy's phone buzzed once on the console. A text from Janelle, time-stamped 6:03 a.m. "Did you pick up the almond milk?" Nancy stared at it for a heartbeat too long, then turned the phone face down. The hotel clerk didn't even look up when Nancy slid her ID across the counter. That was the point. The lobby smelled faintly of burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner, the kind of neutral scent that erased the idea of home. Behind the desk, the young man tapped at his keyboard, a fluorescent badge swinging from his lanyard. "Stay length?" he asked without lifting his eyes. "Week to week?" Nancy said. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone older, steadier. He nodded, hit a few keys, and slid a plastic card toward her. "Name for the reservation?" Nancy paused, then said, "Ann Porter." The name left her lips cleanly with no hesitation. She'd practiced it out loud in the car, just to hear it belong to her. The clerk entered it without question. No one ever did. Room 214 smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and air that had been recirculated too long. The curtains hung stiff and gray, the carpet patterned in anonymous swirls. Perfect. She dropped her bags by the bed, sat down, and exhaled into the quiet hum of the mini fridge. For the first time in years, no one knew where she was. Linda showed up 2 hours later with a to-go cup of coffee and a prepaid phone still in its plastic packaging. "Numbers untraceable," she said, handing it over. "Call forwarding set up. Your old landline will reroute to voicemail only. No return number." Nancy accepted it without a word. She was beyond the point of justifying her choices. She was executing them. Linda looked around the small suite, the queen bed, the kitchenette, the folded towels arranged like swans. "You okay in this?" Nancy gave a small nod. "It's temporary. I just need the noise to stop." Linda sat on the edge of the table, watching her friend with the kind of protective skepticism that only comes from decades of shared secrets. "You're really doing it, huh? The whole clean break?" "I already did." Outside, a snow flurry had started, thin white flakes dusting the parking lot like sugar on asphalt. Nancy walked to the window and watched the wind move them sideways. She sipped her coffee, then reached for the hotel phone. Next part, she murmured. Utility companies first. Each call was efficient and polite. Gas, water, electric. Every account linked to her name was now either closed or reassigned. Janelle's voice would crack when the bills arrived next month. That wasn't cruelty. That was accountability. The insurance provider took longer. Too many forms, too many verification questions, but Nancy was ready for all of them. She had the documents stacked on the dresser in perfect order. Dates, policy numbers, signatures. The agent on the other end sounded young and overwhelmed. Do you have a forwarding address, Ms. Coulter? Not yet, Nancy said. Just mark it as contact by mail only. I'll handle correspondence through the post office. By afternoon, she had a new P.O. box registered under A. Porter, tucked inside a red brick USPS building near the old courthouse. The key felt light, almost symbolic. When she returned to the hotel, Linda was gone. On the desk sat a sticky note in her neat, looping handwriting. Keep copies of everything. And eat something that isn't coffee. Nancy smiled faintly, folded the note, and slid it into her notebook beside the list that had started it all. That evening, her phone buzzed. It was Sam Delgado. Got your request, he said. I flagged all the joint withdrawals. If Greg or Janelle try to touch anything, the system freezes it as suspicious activity. Good, Nancy said. You want notifications if that happens? Only for record keeping, she replied. No alerts to my phone, just the log. Sam hesitated. You sound different, Nancy. I am, she said simply. He cleared his throat. All right. I'll handle it. You take care of yourself, okay? She thanked him, hung up, and sat for a moment in the quiet. The heater hummed. The hallway outside was silent except for the distant sound of a door closing somewhere down the corridor. She looked around the room, the sterile light, the empty drawers, the single painting of a mountain sunrise that meant nothing to anyone. And she realized something that startled her. She didn't miss the house. Not the smell of it, not the noise, not even the framed memories lining the walls. That life had already ended before she ever left. She pulled her notebook from her bag and turned to the page titled Plan. Underneath the old line, I leave quietly. They'll notice loudly. She wrote a new one. Now I disappear cleanly. As she capped her pen, the burner phone vibrated once. A new text. From an unknown number. Mom, where are you? Dad's freaking out. Nancy stared at the screen. It wasn't Janelle's phrasing. It was Brielle's. The phone started ringing before sunrise. First the old number forwarded through the burner, then Greg's contact flashing across the screen. Home. As if the word still meant something. The call buzzed once, twice, then went silent. A few seconds later, it started again. Nancy set the phone face down on the nightstand and poured another cup of coffee. She watched steam curl from the rim, pale against the gray light filtering through the curtains. Outside, snow powdered the cars in the parking lot, the plows scraping in the distance like an old rhythm. By the fourth missed call, she unplugged the phone charger and turned the sound off entirely. She wasn't ignoring them out of spite. She was preserving the quiet. By mid-morning, a text appeared. Greg. You can't just vanish, Mom. This isn't normal. Another, a minute later. Janelle. Real mature, Nancy. We're worried, but sure. Run away. Classic. Nancy didn't reply to either. But then came a third message. Different tone, different rhythm. Brielle. Are you safe? I won't tell them anything. Nancy's thumb hovered over the keyboard. Her first instinct was to write something motherly. I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't worry. But she erased it before she even finished the thought. Instead, She sent a single red heart. No words. Just the symbol. For a long moment she stared at the screen, half expecting the typing bubble to appear. It didn't. She took that as understanding. Later that afternoon, Linda stopped by with grocery bags and her usual dry commentary. "Congratulations," she said, setting down a carton of milk and a loaf of bread. "You've made the official transition into witness protection chic." Nancy smiled faintly. "How'd you find me this time?" "You're not that invisible," Linda said, pulling up a chair. "And besides, you're on a routine. Bank, post office, hotel. You're a creature of habit even when you're reinventing yourself." Nancy didn't argue. She just leaned against the counter, sipping her coffee. Linda looked her over. "They tried calling?" "6 times before breakfast." "And you answered none?" "No." Linda nodded approvingly. "Good. Silence is a language, too." Nancy exhaled through her nose. "It feels unnatural." "That's because you've spent your life filling silence for other people," Linda said, tapping a finger on the table. "Now it's your turn to let them sit in it." That evening, Nancy sat on the edge of the hotel bed scrolling through Facebook, not because she wanted to, but because she needed to. Janelle's profile was public, of course. The newest post was a photo of the kitchen Nancy used to scrub spotless every Sunday. The caption read, "Some people just walk out without thinking. No loyalty left in this world." There were 23 likes and a few pitying comments. Neighbors, co-workers, the performative sympathizers. "Hang in there, Janelle. She'll come around. Family always does." Nancy took a screenshot, saved it in her notes app, and locked the phone. She didn't flinch. She didn't rage. She simply looked at the pale reflection of herself in the window and said quietly, "They're grieving the loss of their doormat." Linda texted later that night, "No contact is still contact. You're living proof." Nancy stared at the message for a long time before responding with a simple thumbs up. Around midnight, the heater clicked off, and the quiet became absolute. It was the kind of stillness she hadn't felt in years. No muffled TV, no footsteps in the hall, no demands masked as questions. Just the sound of her own breathing, steady and calm. She pulled out her notebook and wrote down the date. Under it, a single line. Day 1 of peace. Cost. Everything. Worth. More. She left the notebook open on the nightstand, a silent testament. Across town, her old house was probably still lit, the TV flickering, arguments simmering. She pictured Greg pacing, Janelle performing, Brielle retreating to her room. Each of them filling the space she'd left with noise. Nancy closed her eyes and listened to the hum of the city outside her window. For the first time, she wasn't part of their story. She was the blank space after the period. The email came at 7:12 a.m., tucked between a grocery store coupon and a notice from the library. Alert. Attempted withdrawal detected, $1,200. Transaction declined. Nancy's coffee cup hovered midair. She clicked the message open, eyes scanning the screen. The account number matched one she already knew by heart. The shared emergency fund. The one Greg swore he'd never touch unless it was dire. Apparently, dire now meant brunch money. She set the cup down and took a breath through her nose, slow and measured. The panic she might have felt a month ago never came. Instead, she felt a steady, icy sort of calm. Her systems had worked. The locks had held. She dialed Sam Delgado's private line. He picked up on the second ring. "I saw the alert," he said before she could even speak. It pinged twice in under a minute, both Greg's ID and his IP address. Nancy leaned back against the headboard. "Did it go through?" "Not a cent," Sam said. She could hear him typing. "I'm freezing his access completely. Any further attempt flags as fraud." She could almost see his expression, that blend of banker's formality and old friend loyalty. "Add a note," Nancy said. If he calls, say it's under internal review. Sam chuckled quietly. You want me to play the villain? No, she said, lips curving faintly. Just the wall he can't climb. After hanging up, she opened her ledger, a lined notebook with neat columns of names, dates, balances. Beside emergency fund, she wrote in tidy block letters, unauthorized attempt, blocked. Her next task was overdue. Nancy logged into the credit union's auto loan portal. The screen loaded slowly as though it knew what was coming. Greg's truck, a 2018 Chevy Silverado, sat listed under her name as co-signer. She remembered the day she signed the papers, the way he'd promised to cover every payment, how Janelle had thanked her with a smile that never reached her eyes. 2 years later, the loan was one missed payment away from default. Nancy clicked Remove Guarantor. A warning box popped up. This action permanently releases your responsibility from this loan. Continue? She pressed yes without hesitation. The confirmation email came seconds later. The words glowed on the screen like absolution. By noon, she was back at her desk, the hum of the heater filling the room when her phone rang again. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, until she recognized the voice on the other end. Mrs. Coulter? This is Heather from Colorado Springs Utilities. Nancy sat up straighter. Yes. Hi. I'm calling to confirm the account holder update you submitted last week. We've processed the change. All future billing will go to Janelle Coulter as the sole responsible party. A small, quiet victory. Thank you, Heather. Of course. Just so you know, her first due notice has already been issued. We'll follow up in 10 days if unpaid. Nancy smiled into the phone. I'm sure she'll appreciate your diligence. When she hung up, she let the silence linger for a moment longer than usual. It wasn't satisfaction she felt. It was balance. Linda arrived later that afternoon with takeout soup and her usual blend of sarcasm and insight. She set the bag on the table, sniffed the air, and said, You look smug. What did you do? Nancy didn't look up from her paperwork. Nothing. Just finished handing them adulthood. Linda grinned, sliding into the chair opposite her. Ah, a rare gift. The kind that comes with unpaid bills and panic. Maybe they'll learn, Nancy said. Maybe pigs will fly, Linda countered, spooning out soup. They ate quietly for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. That evening, the phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Greg. Greg, this is petty. You're hurting the whole household. We've got rent due. You could have just talked to us. Nancy stared at the text, her reflection faint in the screen. She imagined him pacing the kitchen, defensive, half aware of what he'd lost. She typed out a reply. You stopped listening long before I stopped talking. Then she deleted it. Instead, she took a screenshot for her records and powered the phone down. Outside, dusk spread across the parking lot, the snow now gray and slushy. From her window, she could see the city waking to its evening pulse, headlights stretching down the boulevard, a bus sighing to a stop. Nancy folded the day's notes into her ledger and wrote one last line at the bottom of the page. They tried to withdraw. I withdrew myself instead. It started with a notification she hadn't meant to see. Her old Facebook account, still technically active under Nancy Coulter, pinged with a tag. Someone had commented on a post she hadn't written. The curiosity was reflex. She clicked before she could talk herself out of it. Janelle's post filled the screen. A family is supposed to be loyal, not manipulative. Some people just ghost when they can't control the narrative. People who ghost family don't deserve forgiveness. The photo beneath it was of the house, Nancy's hydrangeas in full bloom along the porch. The same ones she'd pruned by hand every spring. The caption burned more than the words. They were using her garden as set dressing for their victimhood. Nancy's first reaction wasn't anger, it was precision. She opened her screenshot folder, took a clean capture of the post, and added it to her growing archive. Under each image, she logged the date, time, and URL. Her notes read like an investigator's file. When the next post arrived, an Instagram story this time, it was worse. A black background with white text. Some people cut you off when they're done using you. Guess the free ride had an expiration date. She saved that too. By the end of the week, there were 9 posts. The same rhythm. Vague enough to be deniable, pointed enough to sting. Greg didn't write anything directly, but he liked everyone. Nancy documented them all. Then she opened her notebook, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote at the top, "Digital defamation log." Linda came by that Saturday, bearing coffee and a weary grin. "You're trending in the Coulter household," she said, setting her purse down. "Janelle's treating Facebook like a diary with an audience." "I know," Nancy said, not looking up from her screen. "I'm recording each one." Linda raised a brow. "Planning to sue your own daughter-in-law?" "Planning to be thorough," Nancy replied. Linda smirked. "Thorough is your love language." Nancy almost smiled at that. She closed the laptop, slid the folder of printouts into her bag, and said, "I have a meeting at 1. "With who?" "Someone who specializes in endings." The office of Carmichael and Reed Estate Law sat in a renovated Victorian house near the courthouse. The receptionist recognized her name and offered tea, which Nancy declined. She sat in the waiting room under the ticking of an antique clock, her folder clutched like scripture. When her name was called, she followed the attorney, a calm, silver-haired woman named Dana Reed, into a book-lined office that smelled faintly of cedar and order. "So," Dana said, adjusting her glasses, "you're looking to make updates to your estate?" "Revisions," Nancy said, placing the folder on the desk. "Comprehensive ones." She explained with the clarity of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. She wanted all prior beneficiaries revoked, Gregory and Janelle Coulter to be removed entirely. She wanted her assets consolidated under the Quiet Fund Trust and transferred upon her death to her granddaughter, Brielle Coulter, to be accessed at age 25. Dana listened without interruption, nodding as she wrote, "Executor preference?" "Linda Marsh," Nancy said. "She's already aware, organized, trustworthy." "Any contingencies?" "Yes." Nancy opened her notebook and slid a single page across the desk. "This clause stays attached to the will." Dana scanned it, brows lifting slightly. "Any public defamation, written, digital, or verbal, by disinherited parties shall nullify all potential claims and render them legally ineligible for reconsideration." Dana looked up. "That's specific." "It's necessary," Nancy said evenly. "People should be held accountable for how they speak when they think I'm not listening." Dana leaned back, a quiet respect in her gaze. "Most people come in here heartbroken. You came in here prepared." "I've had practice." By the time Nancy left the office, the sun had fallen behind the courthouse, and the air had that sharp November bite that felt both cleansing and cruel. She walked to her car, her steps slow but unshaking. Inside, she set the folder on the passenger seat. Her reflection stared back from the window, soft, lined, but unmistakably resolute. Her phone buzzed again. Another post. Janelle's latest read. "Some people think silence makes them powerful. It just makes them cowards." Nancy didn't take a screenshot this time. She just whispered, "Thank you," and started the engine. Back at the hotel, she filed the new legal documents neatly in her suitcase and texted Linda a photo of the notarized pages. Linda replied instantly, "You just outlived their entitlement." Nancy smiled faintly, closed the phone, and looked out at the parking lot lights flickering against the snow. The hum of the heater filled the silence, warm and even. She picked up her pen and wrote one last line in her notebook. "Words have weight. I've simply balanced the scale." Then, 3 short knocks at the door. The knocks on the hotel door had turned out to be a delivery, a certified envelope from Carmichael and Reed. Nancy had signed for it without ceremony, slid it under her growing pile of official papers, and gone back to her coffee. But the real noise, the one that would echo for weeks, was still waiting across town. By the second week of December, Greg and Janelle's house, her former house, had begun to unravel the same way their finances had, quietly and then all at once. It started with a red notice taped crookedly to the front door. Past due. Notice of intent to terminate lease. The landlord, a retired teacher named Mr. Holbrook, had been patient for months. Nancy knew because she'd read his name on the utilities for 15 years. He'd seen late payments before, but never from them. Until now. Through Linda's contacts and the kind of local gossip that flows faster than water through a cracked pipe, Nancy learned the details. 2 months behind on rent. Unpaid electric. Janelle claiming the online portal wasn't working. Greg avoiding calls. The silence she'd given them had begun to speak. A week later, she parked a rented car at the far end of the cul-de-sac, heater humming, watching the place from behind tinted glass. It was early morning, the light thin, almost metallic, and she could see her old hydrangeas wilted brown from frost. From this distance, it didn't even look like her house anymore. The curtains were drawn, the blinds uneven, the porch light burned out. Greg's truck, the one she was no longer tied to, sat in the driveway, dusted with snow and missing a side mirror. Across the street, a "for sale" sign stood in front of a beige duplex. The listing had gone up 3 days earlier. Linda had been the one to call about it. "It's listed under market," she'd said. "You could take it through my LLC. No one would blink. Purely an investment property." Nancy had paused on the phone. Across from them? "Next door," Linda corrected. "You'd have a perfect view of the front porch you built." "Perfect," Nancy said softly. And so she bought it. Cleanly, quietly, through Marsh Limited Holdings, LLC. The wire cleared in 2 days. She never intended to move in. She just wanted proximity to the ending. By midweek, a moving truck blocked half the street. From her vantage point, Nancy watched 2 men carry out her old couch, the faded gray one she'd purchased years ago from a warehouse sale, the one that still had a dent where Brielle used to curl up reading. She felt no longing, just a strange, weightless curiosity. One of the movers shouted, "Careful, it's splitting along the seam." Nancy whispered, "It's been splitting for years." Janelle stood on the porch steps, bundled in a puffer jacket, barking into her phone while Greg hauled boxes down the walkway. The wind caught snippets of her voice, sharp, practiced outrage. "You can't just evict people like this," she was saying. "We've been good tenants. This is harassment." The man beside her, likely the property manager, said something calm and procedural. Janelle's tone rose higher. "Evictions are violent, especially when they're planned." Nancy almost smiled. Planned, she thought. For once, Janelle had guessed right. Later that afternoon, a new post appeared on Janelle's feed. A black and white selfie, tears in her eyes. Caption: "Losing everything changes you, but karma always circles back." Nancy screenshotted it out of habit, but the act felt unnecessary. She'd already won the only war that mattered, the one for her own peace. Her burner phone buzzed once more, the sound small in the sterile hotel quiet. It was a message from Brielle. "Brielle, they're packing everything. My room's empty now." Attached was a photo. Pale carpet, bare walls, one corner of floral wallpaper still clinging to the plaster. The space where her granddaughter had grown up, now hollow. Nancy ran her thumb over the image, her chest tightening with something between grief and relief. She typed a reply, then stopped herself. Some silences deserved to stay untouched. She closed her phone, stood, and walked to the window. Snow was falling again, slow and heavy, layering the world in quiet absolution. Across town, movers would finish by nightfall. Greg and Janelle would sleep in a rental somewhere off Academy Boulevard, blaming the economy, bad luck, anyone but themselves. And somewhere between that empty bedroom and this quiet hotel, a chapter was closing. Not with fury, but with precision. Nancy picked up her notebook, opened to the last filled page, and wrote, "They lost the home. I kept the peace." A knock came on her door. Firm, familiar. Linda was standing in the doorway, shaking snow from her coat when she said it. "They're out. Saw the U-Haul turn onto Nevada Avenue not an hour ago." Nancy didn't flinch. She'd known it would happen that day. The timing was clockwork, as predictable as every bill she'd ever paid on their behalf. "Good," she said softly, closing her notebook. "It's time for the rest." Linda handed her an envelope, bank correspondence, stamped and crisp. Final statement from the education fund, the one Greg drained last spring for his business venture. Nancy took it carefully, sliding her nail under the seal. The numbers were clean, zeroed out, the trust listed as closed at account holder's request. "That fund was supposed to help Brielle apply for colleges," she murmured, almost to herself. Linda poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs and sat across from her. "Then you'll make a new one, just without the parasites attached." Nancy nodded. "Today's the day I cut the rest of the cords." She started with the family plan. It had been on her credit card since 2014, 3 lines, all billed automatically, never questioned. She pulled up the wireless account on her laptop, her fingers steady. The interface asked if she was sure she wanted to remove 2 numbers from the plan. She clicked, confirm. Janelle's line went dark first, then Greg's. Somewhere across town, she imagined Janelle mid-rant, staring down at a dead screen that refused to reconnect. Nancy's phone buzzed a moment later. A new message from Greg, sent over Wi-Fi. "Greg. Mom, did you cancel the phone plan? What is wrong with you?" She didn't reply. Instead, she scrolled to her next task. The flagged credit account. Months ago, she'd placed a quiet fraud alert on the family's joint credit line, anticipating exactly this. All she needed now was to finalize the report. Within 5 minutes, she had verified identity, uploaded her documentation, and confirmed the account closure. A notification pinged back almost immediately. Attempted application under existing identifier. Declined. Nancy leaned back in her chair. Outside, the snow had turned to sleet, tapping the hotel window like impatient fingers. Her phone buzzed again. "Greg. I tried applying for a card. They said my credit's frozen. Did you do something? This is messed up." She turned the phone face down and finished her coffee. Later that afternoon, Linda came by again, carrying lunch from the diner and her usual irreverent humor. "You hear the latest?" she said, unwrapping a turkey club. "Janelle's telling people you've got dementia." Nancy arched an eyebrow. "Creative." "Also that you stole from them." Nancy smiled faintly. "Projection. Their new shared hobby." Linda snorted. "Their net worth is nostalgia, and even that's depreciating." Nancy laughed then, a real one this time, low and unguarded. It startled her a little, how light it felt. "You're cruel," Linda said, though there was affection in it. "No," Nancy corrected, still smiling. "Cruelty would have been staying." They ate quietly after that, the sound of the heater filling the room. By evening, the burner phone buzzed again. A message from Brielle. "Brielle, they say you're cruel. I know better." Nancy's throat tightened. Just a little. She typed, "You okay?" "Brielle. I'm fine. I'm staying with a friend for a bit. They're fighting constantly. I miss the quiet when you were here." Nancy hesitated. then sent a small heart emoji. It felt like their secret code now, the language of loyalty without exposure. The following morning, Nancy stood by the window with her second cup of coffee, watching a delivery truck crawl through the icy lot below. Her new legal papers sat stacked on the table, sealed, labeled, and final. One more notification blinked on her phone, an automated message from the bank. Confirmation. Educational trust dissolved, assets transferred to primary holder. She stared at it for a moment before forwarding it to Linda with a single note. "It's done." Linda replied almost instantly. "Then breathe. You've dismantled a dynasty of dependency." Nancy looked out at the gray sky and whispered, "Not dismantled. Redefined." She picked up her notebook and wrote one last line under the date. "They called it cruelty. I called it correction." Her phone buzzed again, this time a notification she hadn't expected. Incoming call. Sheriff's Office, Colorado Springs. The call from the sheriff's office hadn't been what she feared. It wasn't about a missing person report or a welfare check. It was about mail. "2 letters addressed to you, ma'am," the deputy had said politely. "Delivered to your old address, marked urgent. They've been forwarded here through legal channels." Nancy thanked him, gave the P.O. box number she'd registered under Ann Porter, and hung up. She already knew who they were from. 3 days later, she stood in the post office lobby beneath the hum of fluorescent lights, holding 2 envelopes that might as well have been artifacts from a past life. One was thick, Greg's handwriting messy and sprawling. The other, thin, controlled, written in Janelle's cursive so perfect it felt performative. She didn't open them there. She waited until she was back in her hotel room. Coffee cooling beside her, snow tapping faintly against the window pane. Greg's letter came first. It was 5 pages long, double-sided, filled with the kind of sentences that sounded like apologies but weren't. "We miss you. We need you. You left us to drown. I don't understand why you'd abandon your family like this. You could have talked to me, Mom. We could have worked it out." Nancy's eyes drifted across the words without slowing. Every paragraph was an echo of a conversation she'd already had 100 times, the kind where she did all the work, and he called it compromise. Near the end, his tone shifted. "We're barely keeping things together. I don't have the money for another deposit. Janelle's trying, but it's hard. Brielle's not speaking to us much. Please, just call. We'll fix this." Nancy folded the letter neatly along its creases, slid it back into the envelope, and set it aside. Then she opened Janelle's. It was shorter. 2 pages, typed. The first line was clipped, defensive. "We were stressed. You overreacted." Nancy's lips twitched in a humorless smile. The rest of the letter was a study in revisionist history, every cruelty repackaged as a misunderstanding, every slight reframed as, "You took it the wrong way. You should have talked to us before doing something so extreme. It's not healthy to isolate yourself. This isn't you, Nancy. You're better than this." No apology, just polished deflection. She finished reading, then did what she'd done with Greg's. Folded it carefully, slid it back inside, and reached for her notebook. On a clean page, she wrote the date and a single header. Correspondence, family, filed. Underneath, she noted, Greg, manipulation masked as grief. Janelle, control disguised as concern. Then, in bold letters, action, none required. An hour later, she drafted her response. 2 words. No greeting, no closing. Estate sealed. She printed it in crisp black ink on plain stationery, no signature beyond her initials. She slipped it into a new envelope and sealed it with the same blue wax she'd used on the letter to Brielle weeks ago. When she handed it to Dana Reed's paralegal the next morning, she said simply, "Send this through formal channels. Certified. Keep a copy for the record." The paralegal nodded, her professionalism steady but her eyes curious. Will there be any additional correspondence? She asked. Nancy shook her head. This was the last. By the following week, the response had been processed through Carmichael and Reed's estate division. An official notice, clean, legal, and final, went out to Greg and Janelle Coulter. Notice of termination of rights. All financial and estate claims have been voided under Colorado statute. No further legal or familial obligations exist. Dana called her personally that afternoon. It's done. They've been served. Expect noise, but nothing enforceable. Nancy thanked her, hung up, and added the confirmation to her binder. Linda arrived that evening, her scarf dusted with snow, holding 2 slices of pie in paper boxes. I heard you pulled the final trigger, she said, sliding into the chair opposite Nancy. They wanted a reaction, Nancy said, aligning her papers in quiet precision. Linda unwrapped her fork, smirking. And you gave them a record instead. Nancy's eyes flicked up, calm and steady. I learned documentation speaks louder than emotion. Linda grinned, spoken like a woman who's done explaining herself. Outside, the wind howled through the high desert like something cleansing. Nancy stood by the window, her reflection framed against the snow. Her phone buzzed once, an email notification. The subject line made her pause. Subject: forwarded message, Brielle Coulter. The email from Brielle wasn't what Nancy expected. It wasn't an SOS, not even a question. It was a college essay draft, attached neatly as a Word document. Subject line reading: Can you still edit things, Grandma? Nancy opened it before she'd even taken her coat off. The first line made her chest ache in a way that surprised her. Sometimes, the people who leave teach you more about love than the ones who stay. She read it twice before she realized she was smiling. A month had passed since the letters, and life had settled into a rhythm that didn't require apology. Her morning started before sunrise. Coffee, notebook, coat, zipped to her chin, the world still half asleep as she drove to the library on Cascade Avenue, a small sandstone building that smelled of paper dust and floor wax. Her job was simple: shelving, sorting, returning order to the chaos left behind by readers. It paid modestly, but the silence was worth more than any paycheck she'd ever earned. No one here knew her history. To them, she was Ann Porter, part-time library assistant, reliable with decimals and shelving codes. She liked it that way. She learned to love the hush of it, the soft thump of books meeting wood, the quiet whisper of pages turned by strangers. Sometimes she'd stand between the aisles just listening. No demands, no noise, just the pure hum of peace. At the end of each week, she logged her hours, cashed the modest check, and walked straight to First Mountain Credit Union. Sam had set up her new account himself, with a knowing look that said he understood exactly what this was. The name on it read simply, "For Brielle." Every deposit was small, a few dollars from each shift, but it was hers, clean and untouched by anyone else's fingerprints. When the balance hit 200, she smiled. It wasn't much. It was enough. Linda made sure she didn't drift too far into solitude. Every Friday at noon sharp, she'd show up in the library parking lot, leaning against her blue Subaru, waving a thermos in one hand. "Book hermit," she'd call out. "Lunch, non-negotiable." They'd drive to the same corner diner, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and pie that came pre-wrapped in cling film. Linda would always order soup and a grilled cheese, then talk for half the meal while Nancy listened. It had become a ritual, the kind of friendship built not from drama, but from quiet loyalty. "You're glowing," Linda said one afternoon in March, spooning soup as snow melted off her windshield outside. Nancy rolled her eyes. "I'm shelving mysteries and eating soup with you. I'm not exactly radiant." Linda grinned. "Exactly. That's the glow of someone unbothered. Nancy laughed softly. Maybe. Definitely, Linda said. You used to flinch every time your phone buzzed. Now you flinch when it doesn't. That's called progress. Nancy leaned back, smiling despite herself. It's called peace. Don't ruin it by diagnosing me. They laughed together until the waitress came by to refill their coffees. That evening, back in her small apartment, not the hotel anymore, but a one-bedroom rental with creaky floors and a window that overlooked the foothills, Nancy sat at her desk with Brielle's latest essay open. The girl was writing about resilience, about how sometimes survival isn't a story of noise but of silence, of choosing yourself before anyone else does. Nancy's edits were minimal. A comma here, a sentence smoothed there. But at the bottom, she added one note. Your voice is strong. Don't let anyone teach you to quiet it. 10 minutes later, an email came back. Brielle, your edits help more than you know. Nancy's throat tightened. She replied with a single heart emoji, their quiet shorthand for everything unspoken. Before bed, she opened her notebook, the same one that had carried her plans, her lists, her reckoning, and flipped to the last page. The pages before were filled with meticulous notes, bank transactions, legal confirmations, but this page she left mostly blank. At the top, she wrote, "The life I chose." Below it, only one line. I didn't vanish. I emerged. She closed the book, set it on the nightstand, and turned off the light. The phone buzzed once in the dark. A new email. Not from Brielle this time. The subject line read, Notice of Property Transfer. Marsh Limited Holdings, LLC. The property transfer email had arrived just before midnight, and Nancy had stared at it far longer than she meant to. Marsh Limited Holdings, LLC, ownership amendment confirmed. The address wasn't the duplex anymore. It was a tidy ranch home on the north end of Colorado Springs, near Briarcrest Park. When she called Linda the next morning, her friend's voice was bright, suspiciously casual. You're welcome, Linda said. Nancy blinked. You bought another property? Technically you did, Linda replied. With the trust funds. A home in your name. Or rather, the trust's name. Quiet neighborhood. No shared walls. No ghosts. Nancy exhaled slowly. You overstepped. Probably, Linda said. But it's about time you had an address that didn't smell like hotel coffee. By the end of the week, the keys were in her hand. The first knock on the new door came on a Sunday afternoon, soft and hesitant. Nancy opened it halfway and froze. Brielle stood on the porch, a grocery store bouquet clutched in her mittened hands. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes rimmed red but determined. Hi, Brielle said. Nancy's heart tripped once, then steadied. Hi. The silence stretched between them, fragile but unbroken. Finally, Nancy stepped aside. Come in, sweetheart. Brielle slipped through the doorway, looking around like she'd stepped into a memory she hadn't been warned about. The little house smelled faintly of lemon oil and coffee. A fire flickered low in the grate. Nice place, Brielle murmured. It's quieter. Nancy tilted her head. Quieter than what? Brielle gave a small, sad smile. Everything. They sat at the kitchen table. Brielle placed the flowers, pale daisies and eucalyptus, into an old glass pitcher Nancy had found at a thrift store. It's better without them yelling, Brielle said after a moment, voice barely above a whisper. The silence used to scare me. Now I kind of need it. Nancy reached across the table, brushed a stray strand of hair from her granddaughter's cheek. Silence isn't absence, she said. Sometimes it's space to think. Brielle nodded, swallowing hard. They said you'd never talk to us again. I said I'd never fund them again, Nancy corrected gently. Talking is different. Brielle looked down at her hands, twisting a napkin. I miss you. Nancy smiled softly. You found me. That's all that matters. An hour later, Nancy stood and walked to her small home office. The converted guest room she'd filled with neat file boxes and a single wide binder labeled The Quiet Fund Trust. She returned with it in her arms and placed it on the table between them. The weight of it thudded gently against the wood. What's that? Brielle asked. Everything, Nancy said. She flipped the binder open, page by page. Bank transfers, estate updates, property deeds, notarized letters. Her handwriting filled the margins in tidy blue ink. Dates, case numbers, witness initials. Brielle's eyes widened as she followed each section. You did all this? Every line, Nancy said. Every correction, every closure, every safeguard. I wanted it airtight before you saw it. Brielle blinked rapidly, trying to keep up. Why show me now? Nancy's gaze softened. Because you're old enough to understand what loyalty looks like. She slid a pen across the table, a single signature page marked with a yellow tab. You'll be the sole beneficiary when you're 25, Nancy said quietly. Everything I built, what's left of it, will be yours. Brielle stared at her, stunned. I don't deserve that. Nancy reached over, steadying her hand on the table. You never called me a burden. That's the only qualification that matters. The girl's breath hitched, and then the tears came. Soft, unsteady. She covered her face with her palms. They said you were cruel. They don't even know what you've done for them. Nancy moved around the table and gathered her into her arms, the way she used to when Brielle scraped her knees or woke from nightmares. Her granddaughter trembled against her shoulder. All of this, Nancy whispered, because you remembered how to be kind. When Brielle finally lifted her head, her cheeks were blotched, her expression both awe and grief. What happens now? Nancy smiled faintly. Now, you sign. Brielle took the pen, scrawled her name carefully on the line, then set it down with trembling fingers. Nancy closed the binder, exhaling through her nose. You get the house and the truth. That's the inheritance. Brielle looked at her. What truth? Nancy glanced toward the window, the snowy light turning gold at the edges. That family isn't blood. It's behavior. The clock ticked softly. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Brielle stood, wiping her eyes. Can I visit again? Just not tell them? Of course, Nancy said, smiling. Some things are better kept between the living and the honest. At the door, Brielle turned once more. I love you, Grandma. Nancy's throat tightened. I know, sweetheart. That's why this all works. When the door closed, Nancy looked down at the binder still on the table, the ink from Brielle's signature not yet dry. She opened her notebook and wrote a single line beneath the date. She came back by choice. That's the difference. Her phone buzzed against the table. Subject: Notice of Trustee Contact, Marsh Limited Holdings, LLC. Nancy stared at the new email long enough to feel the pulse in her wrist steady itself. Subject: Notice of Trustee Contact, Marsh Limited Holdings, LLC. The sender line made her stomach drop for a moment before she noticed the subheader. Verified submission by secondary party confirmed and voided under prior authorization. Greg had tried to access the trust and failed. By the next morning, the system had locked his attempt, logged his IP address, and automatically issued an alert to both the trust's manager and her attorney. Nancy didn't even need to call Dana. The defense she'd built was working exactly as designed. It was time to make it permanent. The downtown courthouse was half empty that Thursday morning. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the air smelling faintly of old paper and winter coats damp from snow. Nancy stood at the clerk's counter, binder in hand, waiting for the clerk to stamp the final set of estate documents. When the woman behind the counter finally looked up, she smiled politely. These are for public record? Yes, Nancy said. The Coulter Trust, non-contestable clause included. The clerk flipped through the first few pages and gave a low whistle. This is airtight work. Nancy allowed herself the smallest of smiles. It's meant to be. The clerk's stamp came down 3 times, one for the trust filing, one for the property transfer, and one for the updated beneficiary clause naming Brielle Coulter sole heir. The sound of each stamp was satisfying, like the final punctuation marks at the end of a very long story. When it was done, the clerk slid a fresh copy across the counter. You'll receive your certified version in 3 to 5 business days. Anything else today? Nancy paused. That's all the unfinished business I had left. Later that afternoon, Sam Delgado stopped by the library. He looked slightly out of place among the quiet stacks, his wool coat dusted with snow, a manila envelope under his arm. You always did keep the most organized paper trail in Colorado Springs, he said, handing her the envelope. Inside was the signed and sealed record of her trust, notarized and indexed. Tight as a drum, he added with a grin. Nancy held the document for a moment, running her fingers across the embossed seal. I like things that stay shut, she said. I noticed, Sam replied. You've done good work here, Nancy. Not everyone would have done it this way. She gave him a look that was equal parts gratitude and quiet defiance. That's because not everyone learns the difference between kindness and self-erasure. Sam nodded once, serious now. You earned your quiet. He left her with that, his footsteps fading down the library corridor, echoing softly between the shelves. That evening, Linda arrived with a laminator, a small, ancient-looking one she'd borrowed from her church office. If this thing bursts into flames, we're blaming the Lord, she said, plugging it in on Nancy's kitchen counter. Nancy laughed, genuinely this time, and handed her the document. Handle it carefully. It's the last piece. Together, they fed the pages through one at a time. The heat sealed the plastic, trapping the ink and the signature and the embossed stamp forever beneath the glossy film. Linda held up the finished sheet, squinting at it. Looks official enough to survive the apocalypse. It was meant to, Nancy said, setting it on the table to cool. Paper burns, plastic doesn't. Linda gave a mock salute. To permanence, then. Nancy raised her coffee mug. To precision. By Saturday, the mood had shifted back to simple things. Nancy baked lemon bars, an old recipe, tart enough to sting the tongue, topped with powdered sugar that dusted everything like soft snowfall. She packed them neatly in a tin and carried them to the bookstore next to the library, where she'd started helping part-time on weekends. When she walked in, the smell of paper and citrus followed her. The young cashier at the counter smiled. You're the one who makes the lemon bars, right? Nancy laughed. Guilty. Brielle appeared from the back of the shop, hair tucked behind her ear, a stack of donated books in her arms. She blinked when she saw her grandmother. You didn't say you were coming? I figured I'd surprise you, Nancy said, setting the tin on the counter. For the staff. And for you. Brielle lifted the lid, the scent filling the space between them. It smells like home again. Nancy reached across the counter, brushing a bit of powdered sugar from her granddaughter's sleeve. Home isn't a place, she said quietly. It's how you're spoken to. Brielle smiled, eyes glassy. Then I'm finally home. Nancy squeezed her hand once before stepping back, the sound of the bookstore humming softly around them. That night, as snow began to fall again outside her window, Nancy sat at her kitchen table with the laminated record beside her. It gleamed faintly in the lamplight. Her name, Ann Porter, reflecting back like something earned. Her phone buzzed once. Message from Greg Coulter. You think you've erased us. You haven't. The courthouse clerk handed her the envelope like it was a birth certificate, not a rebirth. Congratulations, Ms. Porter, the woman said, smiling. It's official. Nancy opened the envelope just enough to see the seal. Her new driver's license, passport receipt, and court order all tucked neatly inside. Not Nancy Coulter. Not anyone's mother, co-signer, or dependent. Nancy Elaine Porter. She ran a thumb across the embossed lettering, the fresh plastic edges smooth and faintly warm from the lamination press. Her name. The first one she'd ever written in cursive, the one she'd used on nursing exams and patient charts, had come home to her. Outside, snowmelt dripped from the courthouse awning, catching light like glass. She took a deep breath, the air cold enough to sting her lungs. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she owed the world an explanation. At the bank, Sam Delgado whistled softly when she handed over her new ID. "Well, look at that," he said. "Ms. Porter, in the flesh." She smiled. "It feels strange to see it printed again." "Strange good or strange? Good," she said. "Like putting furniture back where it belonged all along." Sam nodded, tapping a few keys on his monitor. "All records updated. You've got a new lockbox, too. Different branch, different key." He slid the small brass key across the counter. It caught the light like a promise. Nancy slipped it onto her keychain, the one that no longer held anything tied to her old life. Sam leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You sure you're ready to walk away from everything?" Nancy's gaze was steady. "I'm not walking away. I'm walking correctly this time." She spent the afternoon running small errands, practical things, grounding things, a visit to the notary, a stop at the post office to redirect the last of her mail, a new library card under her true name. By dusk, she found herself driving down a familiar street she hadn't meant to turn onto. The one that curved past her old house. The hydrangeas were gone now, replaced with gravel landscaping and two sad-looking juniper shrubs. A new car in the driveway. Different curtains. The house didn't even seem to breathe the same air. Nancy parked across the street, watching for a moment. No ghosts, no pull. Just walls and windows belonging to someone else. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Keep it." Then she drove on. The next morning, Brielle met her at the bookstore. It had become their ritual. Saturdays before opening, just the two of them stacking new arrivals and wiping down counters. When Brielle saw the new ID clipped to Nancy's wallet, her eyes widened. "You changed it back," she said softly. Nancy nodded. It was time. "I like it," Brielle said, taking her hand for a moment. "You look like yourself again." Nancy squeezed her fingers. "That's exactly how it feels." They spent the morning shelving donations, the smell of coffee and paper thick in the air. The snow outside had melted into slush, sunlight glancing off wet sidewalks. When Linda arrived just before noon, she was carrying her old camera, the kind with film and a flash that sounded like thunder in small spaces. "Don't ask questions," she said, ushering them toward the front door. "You two, stand right there, under the sign." Brielle laughed. "What's this for?" "Documentation," Linda said. "The good kind." She lifted the camera. "Say whatever freedom sounds like." The flash popped, catching them mid-laugh, Nancy's arm around Brielle, the bookstore window glowing behind them, a chalkboard sign reading, "Still standing," half visible in the corner. Linda lowered the camera, grinning. "Perfect." Then she looked at Nancy, her tone softening. "You were never just mouths to feed, you know." Nancy's expression didn't waver, but her eyes shimmered in the cold light. "No," she said quietly. "I was the hand that kept feeding. Until I didn't." Linda nodded once, the silence between them saying what words couldn't. That night, back in her little house, Nancy laid the photograph on the kitchen table beside her newly minted ID and the lockbox key, the three symbols of her reclamation. Outside, the wind picked up, not harshly, just enough to make the eaves creak like an old song. She made a cup of tea, opened her notebook one last time, and wrote her closing line in neat, deliberate script. They told me, "You're just mouths to feed now." So I packed my things, left no note, and froze every account. Nancy capped the pen, set it down, and smiled. This wasn't the end of her story. It was simply the record of a woman who finally wrote her own.